Okay, so from what I understand, Elizabeth.
Yes, Casey?
You did not finish this week's novel.
Apparently, speed reading the last 20 pages
Not speed
does not
reading.
count.
You said skimming.
I did. I skimmed.
You said skimming.
I skimmed.
Skimming counts as not finishing, which means it's time for punishment. So Liz is taking a shot.
I don't know if I'd call Maker's Mark a punishment.
Liz is taking a half shot, because Liz is a baby about shots.
I am a baby.
Unlike me, who will just throw back whatever you hand her. Like
Keep in mind, the last time I did a shot was at Shot Stop in Aggieville in college.
My last shot, no, that's not true. It wasn't my last shot. But recently, I took a shot. We were at a bar, and there were waitresses standing on the bar just pouring shots into people's mouths. And I, with all of my allergies, was just like, yeah, give me a shot. And like, I'm lucky I didn't die. Because they were like doing fruit vodkas and stuff.
That actually happened to my friend Allie, they were at an airport and they were running 6 hours late. And she's like, yeah, sure, I'll take whatever free alcohol is in there. There were strawberries in it.
Yep.
And she's your ginger.
Yep. Anyway, take the shot. Hey! You gotta...
No.
Proper.
It's my table.
Proper.
No.
Shot.
Welcome to This Is Lit, a podcast where we drink and talk about our favorite books. I'm Elizabeth.
And I'm Casey.
So raise a glass and let's get started.
Okay, Liz, what are you drinking today?
I am drinking Crown and Diet Coke.
Liz, forgoed? Forwent the wine because she had a stressful day and she needed hard liquor. So she's drinking a Crown and Diet Coke. I am drinking dessert wine. It's called Citron. It is
white wine fortified with brandy and lemon.
White wine made with the natural essence of lemon.
Cindy, did you write this?
Chilled and served as an aperitif or after dinner indulgence.
It definitely wasn't Dennis.
I've never had it before, but I like sweet things and I like lemon, so let's see what happens. I'm into it.
Yeah.
It's sour.
It can only be found at Somerset Ridge, and that's our most popular thing.
God bless you and the fucking free wine you provide me all the time.
I do my very best.
I'm very poor. I'm a starving artist now. You know, I don't have a day job
Mm-hmm.
anymore, so I'll take whatever free wine I can get.
Me too. Why do you think I work there?
Hey-o.
Whoa!
Today, we're discussing
Tithe.
a book called Tithe. It's by Holly Black. It is a young adult fairy tale, and it was written in 2002.
Yeah. If I had to sum it up in one sentence, it would be goddamn fairy prince.
More realistically, a one-sentence summary of this book would be: a young girl named Kay discovers that she is not as human as she previously thought when she gets tangled up in the affairs of the Seelie
said goddamn fairy prince.
Of the Seelie and Unseelie courts.
Okay.
Now, to start off, I grew up in a very Irish immigrant family.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore
Crown.
have a lot of fucking superstitions about fairies.
There is a nail hanging over the door to my office right now, just in case.
I got quartz on the iron chain.
Yes, very smart. And
Marshall
I
made it
may
for me.
or may not have smudged this room before we began.
Listen, 9 times out of 10, a fairy doesn't even care to fuck with a human. But that 10th time...
But it's that 10th time.
It's that 10th time that'll screw you over.
Now, there are a couple of rules for dealing with fairy folk or fae.
Rule number 1. Don't share names.
Don't ever give a fairy your name.
Your full name. Names are really important, not only for humans, but for fairies as well. If a fairy has your full name, they can do a lot of damage. And if you have a fairy's full name, you can basically control them.
Yes, which they don't like.
Not at all.
So, if, say, a fairy comes up to you and tells you what they are called and tells them their name, and they're like, oh, and may I have your name? Don't give it to them, because as soon as you give that, you are literally giving away your name to them.
That's like
don't do that.
Ye old Rumpelstiltskin bullshit. Isn't Rumpelstiltskin literally lost because he couldn't guess the name?
He ripped himself apart because the new queen knew his name.
Yes. So I mean, names are important. Rule
Names
number 2: the fair folk are not fans of iron.
No, they are not.
Iron can do damage to them. Most metals can do damage to them,
Yes,
but especially
but
iron.
especially iron.
And it's a good way of protecting yourself, but also use it with discretion, because again, if you don't kill them,
it'll just piss them off.
It'll just piss them off. Rule number 3: don't fall in love with a fairy.
Don't do it.
Just fucking don't.
Just bad things happen. Rule number 4: don't eat or drink anything in the fairy realm. You will get trapped there.
Yeah.
No free gifts. If you
No
go
free
to
gifts.
a fairy realm that looks like a restaurant and they put water on the table for you, that's a trap. Don't drink it. That's a gift. Don't do it.
There's a lot of rules that dictate fairy culture, and this book does a decent job.
Oh, I forgot rule number 5, which is one of the most important. Fairies can't lie.
That's true.
They can obfuscate with the best of them.
But they can't fucking lie to you.
No, they, like, say they had your friend trapped in the basement, they can say, I don't know where they are in the basement. They could be in the corner, they could be at the front, so they could just finish with, I don't know where they are, and they could really mean, I don't know where they are in the basement at this particular time.
Yes. So, dealing with fairies is a lot like dealing with, like, a genie, and a genie is a kind of fae, depending on what culture you're talking about.
Or a demon.
But in this particular novel, the main character is a girl named Kay.
Okay, yes.
Who is the daughter of a wannabe rock star.
Yes.
Who spent the last 16 years of her life traversing around the eastern seaboard while her mom tries to gig it up and become famous. She does not know her father. She's never met him. And the book starts with her being out with her mother on a gig, and with their guitarist / her mother's boyfriend.
He tries to stab her mom.
Tries to stab and kill her mother, which leads to Kay and her mother, Ellen, moving back in with her grandmother in her hometown.
Yes.
Now, Kay is a very imaginative girl. She has a lot of stories about her friends from when she was growing up that she spent time with. Everyone assumes they are imaginary friends, but they were really fairies.
They were really little fairies.
So she knows that by going back to her hometown, she is most likely going to run into these fairies again. And sure enough, within about 48 hours of being in town, she runs into a very mysterious man.
After she was running away from a guy who literally rips her shirt open.
Right. She accidentally, essentially, enchants a guy.
Yeah.
And he tries to force himself on her, and she runs away. And in the middle of the forest, she finds this man who has been mortally wounded, and she helps him. She removes the arrow from his chest. She summons a Kelpie to carry him home. And in return, he promises her that he will answer 3 questions of her choice. And she knows that he is fae.
Yes. If you don't have any iron, ashwood is also good.
Yeah. So, the fae that she meets, his name is...
Roiben?
Roiben?
Roiben.
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 I didn't know if you did the audiobook or not.
They said it Roiben.
Roiben? Yes, but she, of course...
Which now we have his attention.
She, of course, introduces him to her, or she mentions him to her friends as Robin, which I thought was interesting, because
That's your little brother's name, isn't it?
Well, I do have a brother and a father named Robin.
Oh.
My brother's named after my dad.
Dad's name.
But in terms of this story, it's interesting because Robin Goodfellow is perhaps the most well-known of fairies. Puck, guardian of the forest.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to steal your thunder.
And servant to King Oberon.
Who is a member of the Sealy Court.
as described in Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream, which I believe we read previously.
Yes! Oberon and Titania are actually supposed to be rulers of the Sealy Court.
Now, here's the interesting thing.
Yes, my dear.
This book, I have a lot of opinions about this book because this book plays fast and loose with fairy canon.
Yes, it does.
The thing is, this book basically pits the Sealy and Unsealy court against each other as good versus evil.
Which is not necessarily true. In
No!
typical mythology, the Sealy Court is ruled by the Summer Fae and the Spring Fae. And the Unsealy Court is ruled by the Winter and the Fall Fae.
Right. However, well, and I mean, they do a good job of bringing it around at the end of the novel.
They do.
But for the majority of the story, this is presented as the Sealy versus the Unsealy, good versus evil. And Roybin is the head knight of the Unsealy court.
Yes.
He is conscripted to the queen of that court, whose name is Nick Nevin. Queen Nick Nevin.
Nick Nevin, yeah.
And she's pretty fucking bloodthirsty. So anyway, Kay basically helps him when he's wounded. And so he shows up at a diner later and reminds her that he has promised her 3 questions answered.
Yeah. Which he does this at the most inopportune time, which is when Fae typically show up.
Yeah. But most significantly, of the 3 questions she asks him, the 3rd question, she asks for his full name.
Which is, as soon as I got to that part, I'm like, ooh, good girl. Oh, dumb question.
So his full name is Wrath Roybin Rye. Because I'm just over here trying to fuck us up.
Well, you're wearing iron. I'm not.
Well, have fun. So anyway, she knows...
Are there any rules about rainbow courts?
No.
Warding off Fae? Dang it.
Nah.
Damn.
So she knows his full name.
I am being protected by a unicorn, though.
Doesn't quite recognize the significance of it either.
No. Until she tells him to kiss her ass.
At which point he literally kisses her ass.
Yeah.
Now here's the thing with this book. This book was written in published in 2012.
2002, yes.
Which is a fucking 17 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So
God, we're old.
I have some complaints.
As do I. What are your complaints, my dear?
Complaint number 1.
Yes, my love.
As a fucking dyke, I can call myself a dyke if I want to. But if a straight person does it, I will kill them.
Fair.
Because that word is a slur. So is the word faggot. Those are slurs.
Yes.
And while this book has a pretty chill response to queer people, like the queer characters are not villainized, they're still talked about in language that makes me uncomfortable.
Yes.
That's my first complaint. Again, 2002. My second complaint is that there's a certain level of edginess. Unnecessary edginess, which
I hated that about this book.
I saw a lot of that in books written in this time period because I was a quote-unquote youth.
When your mom is bumming cigarettes off a 16-year-old girl, that's not necessary.
I mean, there's a fine line.
And that's
sidebar rant. Here we go. Incoming. I need a sound effect for my sidebar rants. So, sidebar rant. I was a quote-unquote youth in 2002.
As was I.
I read a shit ton of young adult novels. I still read a shit ton of young adult novels.
As do I.
But I haven't... This is the first time I've gone back because I read this book for the first time when it was new. And I remember at the time...
In 2002.
In 2002.
So we would have been 13.
13 years old. And I remember at the time...
I would have loved this book if I was 13.
Oh, shit, yes. And so there's anytime you write a young adult novel, and I assume that most people who are writing young adult novels are actual adults.
Usually.
Some adults are better than others at writing teenagers.
Mm-hmm.
And it really is variable across the board with teenagers. You know, it's a fine line between writing teenagers who are realistic and teenagers who are edgy for the sake of being edgy. A lot of teenagers have sex. A lot of teenagers underage drink and smoke. However, this book...
She's trying too hard.
Seems to be it seems to fall more into the edgy than realistic, I guess, is the best way to describe it. Because, Kay and her friends are constantly... smoking and drinking,
shoplifting.
And while Kay never has
skipping school, she's dropped out of school by 16.
But while Kay is not explicitly having sex within the context of the book.
No,
it is implied that she has, and it is implied that her friends are, and it's again like it's hard to say because teenagers, you know, they do that stuff.
Yeah,
but. It just comes across as a little bit too edgy, which makes
just describing the fashion choices of these girls, it's like these girls are obviously trying to be edgy on purpose. Mm-hmm. They're not being edgy because that's how they are. They're purposely trying to be this way.
Right. And
that was really frustrating.
The other complaint I have is again a fine line of the difference between playing hard to get and sexual assault.
Yeah.
Which not only happens to Kay, also happens to Corny. It's like a situation of like, is this what I wanted to happen or am I being assaulted?
Yeah.
And it bothers me.
It bothers me as well.
I feel like this book would be very different if it were to be written today. Mm-hmm. And... you can make your arguments, whatever arguments you want to make about political correctness, but again, this book does some really good things. Like, I know for a fact, you know, there are people of color in this book.
Yeah.
Like the main character the main character turns out to be Faye, but the character, the changeling.
She's a changeling.
The child she replaced was half Asian, was half Japanese. There's a black character.
Yeah.
There's a queer boy, a gay boy. So like it does a lot of things right, but a lot of things just are kind of just slightly not where I want them to be.
Yeah.
And again, when I was 13, I fucking loved this book. This is the first book in a series, and I was obsessed with the whole series. And that's why I recommended it for reading it. And then when I went back and read it, I was like, okay, I have some complaints about not only the political political correctness.
I'm the one who took the shot.
But also about the writing in general. Because the book comes across to me as Holly Black had a bunch of ideas of something she wanted to do. And she was so eager to get to the payoff for the ideas that she kind of rushes through a lot of things.
Yeah, it was spit up onto the page.
It feels very rushed in a lot of places. And a lot of places where it could have stood to have more backstory, and it didn't. For example, Corny as a character.
Yeah.
By the time the book is over, I really like Corny.
Yeah.
And I think he's interesting, and I feel bad for him, and I like, you know, I want him to have better in his life. But at the beginning of the book, he's talking about how he imagines going and sitting in places, and he imagines shooting people.
Yeah.
Which did not age well.
I'm like, excuse me? And
then
that doesn't really fit with the rest of his character throughout the book.
Right, it's like she had this vague idea for him, and then she decided not to follow up on it, but she didn't remove the stuff she had previously. And then taking into account, this book came out before, like, a school shooting happened every week.
Which is horribly... If you're not upset about that right now, you should be.
So, anyway, my point is that particular passage about Corny has not aged well.
No, that is not aged well.
And it made me very uncomfortable.
Dislike him.
Yeah, I was very uncomfortable. But then, even with that, and even disliking him from that, by the time we got to the end, I really liked him as a character.
Yeah.
So, it feels like there are a lot of unfinished pieces here. And again, it is the first book in a series.
So of course she's got to leave some stuff open-ended.
But there's a lot of question about, like, control over a situation. Mm-hmm. And, like, not only situations where both Kay and Corny find themselves in situations that may or may not be assault.
Yeah.
As opposed to consensual encounters. There's also the situation of Roybin and whether or not he actually wants to be doing what he's doing or he has to based on who is commanding him because they have
based on the command. So
It's complicated. I enjoy it, but I see a lot of ways it could have been done better.
Agreed. I will say, though, for Holly Black, this book is exceptionally well researched. Mm-hmm. She really knows her fairy lore.
The fairy lore is great. The fairy lore is great. There are a lot of fairies. Anyway, the point is, getting back to the actual plot of the story. Yes. The sidebar is over. It was a long sidebar. It was like a 20-minute sidebar. Kay now has the name of a major player in the Unseelie Court.
Yes, her little fairy friends don't like.
And she also knows about something called the Tithe, which is what the book is named for, which is essentially the concept being there is the Seelie Court, there is the Unseelie Court, and then there are the free agents, essentially.
Yes, the word tithe stems from Old English, meaning 1/10. And back in the day, back in medieval England, when a lot of these beliefs, these fairy beliefs came into being, was people had to pay a tithe or 1/10 of their income to the church. So this is payment for continuing
to be. So essentially, if the Unseelie Court were to have a tithe, in this case a human sacrifice,
yes,
they would maintain control over the non-affiliated fairies who are not affiliated with either court. On the one hand, those fairies would get protection. Yes. On the other hand, they would be bound to the laws of the Unseelie Court for the next 7 years.
Yes. Which, we remind you, the Unseelie Court in this novel is the quote-unquote evil court, when in actuality, they're actually the Winterfall Court.
Yes, but as far from a human perspective, all fairies are somewhat evil because they don't
From a human perspective, just don't.
From a human perspective, fairies are evil because fairies don't care about humans. And so the only time they interact with humans is out of curiosity, which usually leads to pain for the humans.
Yes. Now, it's kind of like if you're a human, don't get involved with a god, because it can only end badly.
Right. Now, Kay discovers in fairly short order that she is not, in fact, human, but she is a changeling child who was brought to replace the actual Kay.
Yes, she is a pixie who is
under a heavy glamour.
Heavy glamour, originally from the Seelie Court.
But she doesn't know that off the top. She just knows that she's a changeling under a heavy glamour.
She knows the queen said, "Hey, put her with somebody."
Well, but she doesn't know that right off the bat. All she knows,
her little friend buddy told her.
No, all she knows is she is a fairy living in a human world, and she's unaffiliated.
Oh yeah.
And therefore, the unaffiliated fairies think that if the Unseelie Court tried to sacrifice her as a human,
the tithe would be forfeit.
And then they realize that she is not human before they sacrifice her, the tithe will be forfeit. However, once the sacrifice situation actually arises, it turns out that her friends were going to let her be sacrificed and then reveal her glamour after she was dead.
So that way it wouldn't work.
And then the
because the sacrifice still had to be made.
And then the unaffiliated fairies would be free for the next 7 years, which is fascinating to me. That 7 years.
But you do not want those little evil things free for 7 years.
Also, 7 years is not that long a time when you're immortal. Like,
I know.
There's a lot of kind of holes here.
7 years is a magical number in many mythologies. 7. Sure. Like, look at Harry Potter. 7 was a magically binding number.
Everybody in Harry Potter is mortal.
Dumbledore was 150. But still mortal.
Anyways.
It's the crown talking. I like crown.
Anyways. During this whole process, in true young adult novel style,
I'm sorry, I should roll my eyes.
The gruff and grumpy Unseelie knight who she saved, instead of just being like, "Oh, you have control over me," starts to develop like feelings for her. The problem with this novel is the pacing is
never works.
All over the fucking place.
It is. If if I was 13, I would have loved this book.
Yeah.
However, as
You're
an
not
adult,
13.
I am far from it. Drink. Yeah, we are far from being 13, 14 years old. But I feel like you and I would probably agree that I feel like that there is a difference between young adult and teen. And I really feel like this book is truly teen. Like, once you're out of your teenage years, this book has a harder time resonating.
Yeah. I mean, I still read a lot of young adult and teen novels. I just think that this was like, she had a lot of ideas, but she didn't want to. It's almost like she had all these really cool ideas, but she didn't want to write an outline before she started writing the story.
Exactly, yeah.
And so some of them get lost in the wayside. Some of them don't come to fruition. And some of them are really emotionally potent.
Yes.
For example, when her friend Janet is killed by a Kelpie, holy shit.
I know.
It's really, really emotionally potent.
It is.
But like...
Because Janet was really kind of the only person who's been there through her whole life.
But like minutes earlier, she was like at a rave watching humans and fairies dancing together and like chaos happening.
Yeah, to apologize to a guy for accidentally enchanting him.
Yeah, like, I don't know. It's just, the writing is weak. I'd like to see some of Holly Black's more recent writing. And maybe we'll revisit this author and something she's written more recently later.
I told you I have my friend who... She reads a lot of Holly Black, actually.
Yeah, she's written a shit ton of novels.
Holly Black is very prolific.
She's very prolific, and most of her stories are fairy stories.
Yeah. And she keeps popping up on my Audible. But my friend who reads a lot of Holly Black, she has told me Holly Black is one of those, for our group taste anyway, she's like, Holly Black is one of those authors where you either hate it or you love it. There is no in between.
Right, and again, like, this is the book that I specifically, when Liz and I were discussing what to read next on the podcast, I specifically named this book because when I was 13 years old, I thought this book was the shit. And then I read it again, and like, full disclosure, Liz had to take a shot at the beginning of the night because she hadn't finished the book.
Yeah.
She skimmed it.
I skimmed
full
the ending
disclosure,
because I was done.
I read the entire book in about 90 minutes earlier today. And I was like, okay, so this could use about 6 more drafts and an editor. Like, grammatically, it's not bad.
I'm terrified to let you read my shit now.
Okay, but I'll lie to you if it's bad.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh. The thing is, I really like the general story. I really like the chemistry between Kay and Reuben.
That's the thing that killed me, was I loved this story, but by the time that I got to the last 4 or 5 chapters, I was done.
There are some really likable characters. I really like Corny. I really like Kay. I really like the chemistry between Kay and Reuben. But there's so much extraneous detail that doesn't ever come to fruition. And I know it's the first in a series, but I think when it was written, she didn't really know if there was going to be a series. And I haven't read the rest of the series since I was 13, so, like, you know.
There is so much about this book I like. I like the fairy lore. I like Reuben. I like Kay. I like Corny. I like the plot. I like the kind of overarching idea of it.
The aesthetic.
Going
back to what we talked about last time.
The aesthetic is wonderful.
We talked about Dorian Gray and we talked about aesthetic in our last episode.
2002 grunge, man.
The aesthetic of this book is very much, it's like a meshing of fairies with modern times. It's very much like...
I love that. That's fantastic.
Modern, like, fairy punk aesthetic. And, like, I think about scenes where they talk about, like, being in the fairy court and, like, watching, like, horrific things happening in one corner of the room and beautiful things happening in the other corner of the room. It's very, very visually stimulating.
Yeah.
But the entire story, cohesively, is a bit of a train wreck.
I agree. I had my friend who recommended that. It's Allie, who we should have as a guest on our show, really, sometime. Allie, if you're listening to this, pick a month, you'll be a guest. And a book. Pick a book. Not the Silmarillion.
I
know you. Not the Silmarillion.
I can't discuss the Silmarillion properly when I'm sober. It's a lot. A lot. It's a lot.
We'll save the Dresden Files for you, dear. And yes, I will finish it eventually. There's 20 books of that now. Oh my god. Anyway, side tangent over. Allie is the one who, she had been recommending Holly Black to me, and she was the one that told me that, you would either love it or you hate it.
Mm-hmm.
And she's has actually some education in writing, and she said one of her professors said that sometimes you can have everything right about a book, except if it doesn't have a song, it's not going to work.
A song.
Like if there is not a song that doesn't resonate, like if the melody isn't there,
mm-hmm.
if it doesn't resonate with your reader, it's not going to work. And this book just didn't have a song for me.
Yeah, I'd like to...
It didn't have that je ne sais quoi that made me invested.
So it's the first in a trilogy. The second is Valiant, and the third is Ironside.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of want to reread them just to see if, like, that feeling is there for me again.
Yeah.
But, I mean, realistically, we've all read a lot of books in our lives, and a lot of books that we've forgotten and moved on from. I read probably more than average.
Yeah.
I'm a speed reader, and I'm also like ADHD, so I have hyperfixations.
Yeah.
So like there was one summer about 3 years ago where it was like all I cared about was queer coming of age young adult novels.
Yeah.
I read probably 20 of them in one summer. And that same thing happened with this. Like I read this, there was like 3 other Faerie books that I read around the same time. And they stuck with me. But reading them again as an adult just kind of left me a little...
Wanting?
I wanted more details about the fairy world and less extraneous detail about...
the color of eyeshadow.
Or the fairy life. Or the family life.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a lot of good things about this book.
Like, going back to having a song, even Four Winds, One Storm had a song for me. And that's how I was able to finish it. This just didn't have it.
I feel the same way about this as I did. I was thinking about that because Four Winds, One Storm is a situation of like no criticism meant to Erin.
No.
But it's like not super commonly read. Like it's not wildly popular.
No.
In the same way that Holly Black is. In her particular...
Well, to be fair, Holly Black is more prolific.
That's what I'm saying.
And a lot of that is saturation of media.
Holly Black is very prolific. Aaron Hollingsworth is not necessarily super prolific, but there are people within his fandom that would absolutely live and die by his novels.
Yes.
And Holly Black has the same thing, but for me, on both cases, it was a situation of like, I have this really solid idea, but either in Aaron's case, I put too many extraneous details that make it lost in the focus, and in Holly's case, I didn't focus enough on the framework that the story gets lost in the framework. Very different reasons.
Yes.
But I feel the same about both books. Like I really wanted to enjoy them, but I felt like there wasn't enough substance there for me to do so.
Yeah, I felt like Four Winds, One Storm had way more substance than this did.
I was more invested in the relationships between characters in Four Winds, One Storms.
Agreed.
And this one, the only relationships, even Janet.
Yeah.
Who, I found her death very shocking and tragic.
And sad, but
I was still there's not... You've told us that
I didn't care about Janet.
You've told us that she and Kay were really close, but you never showed us that she and Kay were close.
No. Especially if Janet is getting super jealous over Kay and her boyfriend.
Kenny.
Yeah. Like, if I came home and you were talking to Paul and you were both just sitting on the couch, it'd be like, sup? No problem.
Yeah, eventually there is a point at which it makes sense for Janet to get jealous when she finds them necking in the hallway.
Yeah.
But before that, the jealousy seems misplaced, and we don't have enough of Kenny's backstory to know if he's a womanizer, and so she has justification for it, or if she's just really paranoid.
Which, by the way, ladies, if you cannot trust your guy like that, time to get a new one.
Date women.
Or date women, it's safer.
Anyway, the novel resolves with a fairly decent twist.
Mm-hmm.
The twist, which is, because I remember even the first time I read the novel, I was like, again, I grew up in an Irish family.
Yes.
Which means that I know a shit ton of fairy lore. I remember being a kid and putting sugar and warm milk in a bowl and leaving it outside.
We were not quite that bad, but my grandfather was Scotch-Irish, and he always said we make our own luck.
I literally remember leaving out milk and sugar water for the piskies.
You know those little 4-leaf clover hole punches you can buy? He'd just be kind of like, okay, we're going to go find leaves. And so we would go find leaves and punch out 4-leaf clover.
That's cheating.
No. He's like, it's equalizing the playing field.
It's cheating. Anyway, so I really enjoy the fairy lore, but I've totally lost train of what I was saying. What was I saying?
You grew up in a family.
I grew up in a family.
Ending twist.
Oh, yes. So I grew up in a family that had a lot of fairy mythology. And so even the first time I read this book when I was younger, I remember being frustrated because I was like, you can't make the Seelie and Unseelie courts good and evil. It's more complex than that. Individual fairies have their own various like storylines and things that they believe.
It's
but
kind of like
fairies in general
there are no good people and Death Eaters.
Right. And like fairies don't care about humans. So like the relationship they have to humans, like the way we compare fairies to each other, good and evil, it's more complicated than that.
It is.
And so I was frustrated through this whole book, and then you get to the end, and it turns out that the queen of the Seelie court has been orchestrating the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
That is one thing I thought this book did really well. Is I was like, okay, now it makes more sense. It's like they're more concerned with like their own affairs than they are with the world of humans.
Yeah.
And that makes sense. Like even the 3 fairies that Kay thought were her friends are more concerned with how fairies' lives are going to be than those of humans, even though they
just wanted their freedom. They didn't give a shit about Kay.
They don't give a shit about what humans do. The only reason they gave a shit about Kay is because she wasn't actually human.
Yeah.
And I thought that was well done, but it took so long to get to that payoff that at that point it almost wasn't worth it anymore.
Yeah. So anyway, this book ends with Reuben ruling everything, basically.
Reuben becomes the head of the Unseelie court, and he has got a pretty strong moral compass, because that's the whole other thing.
He's like, a knight!
Originally, he was a knight of the Seelie court, and when she got bored of him, she traded him away. And so he has all this, like, fucking trauma, but it also means that he's willing to, like, worry about humans in a way that fairies don't typically do. And, like, willing to accept that humans deserve to live their own lives in peace. Like, I don't know that he necessarily wants to help humans, but he does think that we should leave them the fuck alone. Which is more than can be said for the unaffiliated fairies or the Seelie court.
Yes.
So when he takes over the Unseelie court, after Kay straight up fucking poisons a dude, and then Corny stabs him to death.
Uh-huh.
I will say this book does one thing well. And that is that it does not romanticize or glorify fairies.
Definitely not.
Like, it definitely acknowledges that fairies are very scary and fucked up. It definitely acknowledges the violence inherent in, like, fairy lore.
Did you ever read A Court of Thorn and Roses?
Yes.
We should read those. You have problems. Because I haven't read the rest of them. I've just read the first one.
Anyway. My point is, this book does the things with fairy lore very well. But in terms of a cohesive storyline that makes sense from point A to point B, and from people's that's the other thing I find in young adult novels.
I don't remember. Do they ever explain why her mom's boyfriend suddenly decided to fucking kill her?
Yeah, because the knight of the Seelie court enchanted him.
Thank you.
Specifically to get
That's what I thought.
To get her to go back home to her family. But the thing is, there's so many convoluted plot details that you lose the thread of them. It's like, yeah, the Seelie and Unseelie court lore is really good. the chemistry between certain characters like Royben and Kay is really good, but the overarching plot is a little too convoluted to work.
Yeah.
And for that reason, it makes it hard to focus on what's actually going on within the novel.
Yes. And I would like to point out we've been doing this almost, a year? This is the first book I've just kind of skimmed the ending because I was done. I was finished with it. I'm like, okay, we should have had the payoff by now. I'm done. I'm bored. I want to move on to something else.
And again,
Astonishing Legends is a new episode out about gremlins. I want to listen to that first.
And again, there might be more payoff within the second and third books,
That's
but
true.
I don't care to read them.
No.
It's not like 2 episodes ago we did Maureen Johnson.
Yes.
And we're both desperate to read more.
Yes,
Because
please.
she does an excellent job of writing young adult novels.
Yeah.
Where not only are the characters relatable, they seem like real teenagers.
I feel like Maureen Johnson writes young adult. I feel like this was written teen, and I feel like there is a difference.
But teens are young adults.
They are young adults, but I feel like there are some young adult themes that just kind of like resonate past young adulthood. And then I feel like there are just... And then I
don't think it has anything to do with the age group or the genre, and I think it just has more to do with somebody who had so many ideas and was eager to get them out, but not to organize them. And I've been that person. There have been times when I've been like, I have this vision of a story, and I want to write it so bad.
Yeah.
That I just spit out this.
I just sent some of my stuff to my unofficial editor, and she's like, there's some stuff that they don't need to know yet, so we're going to get together and go through that.
Yeah, like, I mean, there's definitely been times when I've been so eager to, like, get to the point of a story that I've skipped over the important details, and it makes it a little underwhelming.
Yeah.
And I think...
And see, my problem is I'm revealing all the big stuff too soon.
Yeah. So I think that's what happened here. I think it's just a situation of, like, she was so excited about the story that she rushed through it and didn't give us enough of the nuance to make it feel realistic.
It's a genuinely interesting story, and it's worth being told, but I was done.
Yeah. No, I agree. And like I said, it's very evident, but I don't think it has anything to do with the teen/young adult label. I think it more has to do with the patience of the author in their writing. Like that's what it comes down to. You can feel her impatience to get to the big climax. You can feel her impatience in the writing.
There was another book that I read a long time ago, and it was one of those kind of urban mystic, kind of dime store assassin books, One of those that it was just for fun. And it was one of those that, like, it was the first in a series, and I listened to it, and I'm like, I barely finished it. And, like, the only reason I finished it was because I was working 60 hours a week, and I needed to do something to keep me awake.
Right.
But it was... I can't remember. It was before this. I'm scrolling through my Audible as I'm muttering to myself.
We'll cut this shit. It's fine. We'll cut all of the muttering.
We'll cut all this shit. Casey will take care of this in post because she's a wonderful person.
I am. No, I've just gotten good at editing.
She has gotten
by virtue of having to do it over and over again.
There's my Star Wars phase.
You could go to school and learn how to edit video and audio, or you could just do it until you get good at it, which is what I've done.
That's true. You could do that as well. I can't remember the name of the book, but it was one of those that it was like a dime store assassin novel, and it was like the first in a series of 6, and I read it, and I'm like, yeah, it was fine, but it just didn't... Oh, there it is. What?
Go ahead.
And I'm like, yeah, it was fine, and it ended on, like, this big major cliffhanger, because the big deal with the assassin was, like, her whole family was killed when she was a little girl, and the only reason she survived is she ran away. And, because there's, like, some sort of elemental mafia or whatever.
Sure.
And then, like, the big twist at the ending, it was like, her baby sister was alive. And I'm like, oh, wow, yeah, that's a good twist. I'm not reading the rest of these books because I don't fucking care.
Yeah, that's where I feel with Tithe. It's like, I feel like there were good things in it, but not enough to hold my attention for 2 more books.
I found another one similar. It's called Bite the Dust. by Cynthia Eden. Interesting story. First in a major series. At major twist at the end. Didn't care to read the rest of them.
Have you read Of Gods and Monsters?
No, I actually own it though.
Fuck. Fuck, it's so good.
Of Gods and Monsters.
Mm-hmm. Daughter of Smoke and Bone. Shit, so good. So good.
Yeah. Because this is March, right?
I don't know what month it is.
It's March.
This is March. This will be our March 30th episode.
So we will have already had St. Patrick's Day. So it's appropriate that I'm drinking Crown.
Oh, sure, Jesus.
Yeah.
So how many bottles of wine? How many bottles of whatever alcohol you're drinking would you give Tithe by Holly Black?
I would probably buy 2 bottles to get through it.
2.5 for me.
So 2.25.
2.25 bottles. Not the best that we've ever
it's not.
seen.
We've had better.
But I also give it more than I've given other books in the past.
That's true. I've given it more than I've given other books in the past.
The thing is, like, there's a lot of good in there. It's just so convoluted and twisty.
But see, I am not a person who is going to give a 1 bottle rating unless I absolutely hate the book.
I did that.
Yeah. But
Sorry.
no, I actually enjoyed this book probably the least out of any book we've ever picked.
Fair. I enjoyed it more than a couple, but not by much.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in reading further in the series. Thank you guys for reading. If you're interested, check out Holly Black's Tithe. If you're not interested, don't do that.
Yes, and next month is going to be a surprise.
Next month will be fun.
It will be fun, and I am terrified.
So thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Cheers!
Cheers!
Thank you for listening to our podcast. For more information, visit us at litliteraturePodcast.com or check out our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages. And remember, too much work and no vacation deserves at least a small libation. Cheers!